I'd love to introduce Colonel Beth Wolney. She served 20 years in the US Marine Corps Reserve as a logistics officer, and her last active duty billet was in Norfolk, Virginia, where she taught operational strategic level planning at the Joint Forces Staff College. She previously spent 18 months on active duty as the Research and Assessments Branch Head with the Marine Corps Force Innovation Office. While there, she led the development, coordination, facilitation, and presentation of Marine Corps research related to the integration of women into ground combat arms. Her personal awards include a Meritorious Service Medal, a Career Development Fellowship from the George Washington University, 2 Navy Commendation Medals, and 2 Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medals. So now I'm going to hand over to Beth to talk about how military leadership techniques can be beneficially applied to non-military organizations. Beth, it's over to you.
Thanks so much, Mark. I really appreciate it. And I must say, I'm so happy to be here. I've been fortunate enough over the course of my career to work quite a bit with the Royal Navy and Royal Marines. So it's great to be back amongst the British military community. Thank you so much. And let me start off by saying that, as I'm sure most of you know, or all of you know, leadership is a privilege. And I've always approached it from that perspective, especially in the Marine Corps. That was one of the first things I was taught, is that being a Marine leader is a privilege. And we should take the responsibility seriously. As such, I've worked to continually develop myself as a leader over the 20 years that I was in the Marine Corps, working for the Marines and the Navy and the Joint Staff. We're always leaders in the Marine Corps, and I'm certain, since so much of our traditions come from the Royal Navy and the Royal Marines, that that's also true in the UK. That if there's 2 Marines in a room, somebody's in charge, someone's a leader. And we do that even if we're not necessarily in charge, by setting the example, having integrity, excellence, and professionalism. Nothing that's a surprise to anyone in the audience here. In my civilian experience, I applied some of the basic leadership principles that I learned in the Marine Corps. And while I was not surprised by the results, leadership is leadership no matter where you do it, whether it's in the military or the civilian world. I was surprised by their reception. I was surprised to realize that all the things I'd heard about military leadership in the civilian business world were true, that leadership was appreciated. It was something that not everyone knew how to do. And it was something that I could share with my colleagues. And as such, this experience actually encouraged me to move into leadership and executive coaching. I really hadn't thought seriously about that I had something to offer to the business world, but this experience encouraged me to do so. I think it might be value added. The principles are universal, and they're so important in any situation. So for today's talk, I'm going to be discussing a few different things. First, I'll talk about leading down, which is what most of us understand leadership to be, is that we are in charge, we're the leaders, we have subordinates, and we must do something with them to get them to accomplish the mission. I'm also going to talk a little bit about leading up, which is something I first started into about 10 years into my Marine Corps career, which I found to be hugely beneficial, both for myself and my leaders, and is something I think can be value added anywhere you go. And then in the last part of the discussion, I'm going to talk about men leading women and women leading men. When I was a Marine, when I first came into the Marine Corps 20 years ago, I was 6% of the population, which meant that 94% of my colleagues were men. So I learned how to deal with men, be led by men, and lead men, and never thought much of it until I got out and went somewhere else and found out there were certain things about that environment that would be helpful to know. So those are the topics I'm going to cover. I'm planning for it to take 40 minutes or so, and then I'm happy to take questions, or if you have them as you go along, please put them in the chat and we can go from there. So when we talk about leading down, I think there's a few principles that I always bring to the forefront. There's always vision. We have to have vision. Sometimes it's known as commander's intent. Just where are we going? What does the forest look like? How are we going to get there? What's the ultimate goal? And the reason this is important is to have vision is to have everyone in the company or in the unit all working in one direction, all rowing in one direction, regardless of what their part in it may be. Communication is hugely important. We must communicate with the team. I know you all know this, but sometimes we take it for granted. We're just going along doing our thing and we know we've got everything, but we don't necessarily communicate it. Integrity is the number one thing I pride myself on and try to remember and instill in my subordinates. Just have integrity in everything you do. That builds trust. And when we trust each other, we can work together a lot better. Accountability and caring. Caring, I think, is the one trait that I see in the business world, but not in the same way as I saw in the Marine Corps. And it's just as important. There's certain ways that I've applied it that I think have been extraordinarily useful. So caring, I definitely put at the top of the list. And this all builds trust and equity. And trust is the most important thing we need in any situation, because when things get difficult, when things get really busy and we just need people to do what they need to do without us being there or telling them how to do it or coaching them along, we have to build that trust so that we know everybody's rowing in the same direction and we can rely on each other. And when we build equity in the team and they feel like they're part of the solution, they feel like their ideas are heard and they can try new things and they feel trusted, they're also more willing to work harder, work longer hours, and see the mission all the way through. This is true in the civilian world as it is in the military world. One of the things that I used in my civilian corporation was a basic intro conversation. So I was in charge of operations and I wanted to reconnect with everyone on the staff. And so I just reached out to people to have an individual conversation. Now, I would do this with my Marines. I would set up individual time with all of my Marines, whether I was at the platoon level or the company level, leading a company of Marines, or just in an office with 5 or 10 or 15 Marines working for me. You know, I would ask, why did you join the Marine Corps? How do you feel about this job that you're in now? What do you like about it? What are your challenges? Where do you see yourself going? Where would you like to go? And I had that same conversation with a variety of members in the staff, you know, just to get to know them a little bit more as a person, take that time to build a relationship, ask them why they were here. Why did they join this organization? Finding out those answers allows me to know what's important to them. And I can leverage that later. What do you like about your job? People will do things more often and better when they like to do them. So I usually like to get people working towards their strength as often as possible to build the best team possible. Because to me as a Marine leader, it's all about building the best team. I'm very much someone who believes that it's not just one person who carries the team. The whole team, with all of our strengths and weaknesses, bring us together. And then what's most challenging about your job? And the reason I ask this question is I want to know what's holding them up. Perhaps it's an inefficiency that just hasn't been identified yet. Perhaps it's something that's genuinely challenging that I can perhaps address. And if I address this and follow up and show them that I heard them, that I came up with an idea or a few ideas to try, or said, you know what, there's this idea, but it's not going to work because of this, or this one might work, I'm building trust. I'm showing that I can be relied on to take their challenges seriously, do something about them, follow up, whether or not that actually results in action taken. Do they have an idea? If possible, I like to try their ideas. People, we all know this, we all want to try our ideas out. And Marines are the same, people in the business world are the same. So if it's possible, I love to let people try their ideas and see what happens. If it's something good, then the whole team benefits because we implement a new idea. And if it's not, well, we've learned something. So again, leading down for me is all about trust and equity. I'm trying to build trust and equity in building a team by presenting a vision, by showing interest, getting them to talk to me, building that relationship, building communication. You know, there should always be a two-way communication going on with the team. Back to that vision. So when I say have a vision, have a plan, that's really important when you're dealing with unexpected and uncertain times, right? When things get challenging, people want to know that their leader has a plan and that they know where we're going. They don't want to deal with the uncertainty too much. That's our jobs as leaders. And that's true whether it's the military or it's the civilian world. They want to know that we've got it. We had an employee leave quite unexpectedly. A senior team member left. And the first thing that I did was put together a plan, thinking about how is this going to affect each individual team member? How is this going to affect each individual section? What compensations can we make to ensure their lives transition as smoothly as possible? And as we talked to the whole team about what was going on, I didn't focus on the person leaving. That was already done, and it had nothing to do with any of them. I focused on the way ahead. I focused on the future, on the vision. We still had the same vision for the team. We had a plan with how we were going to move forward. And there were difficulties. You know what? If something's going to be tough, and the Marine Corps is really good at this, if something's hard, we will say it out loud. We will say, this is going to be hard. It is not going to be fun. We're not going to like this, but we're going to get through it together. And that's so important. And I feel like sometimes those outside the military don't want to acknowledge that something's going to be really hard. There's hesitation to say, this isn't going to be any fun, guys, but we're going to get through it. Being straightforward and truthful with your team, as I'm sure all of you who have been in the military know, is so important, because the team knows what's up. And in the Marine Corps, it was the Lance Corporals. We called it the Lance Corporal Underground. They know what's really going on, and they're going to talk, and they're going to, come up with their own solutions or their own perspectives. And as leaders, it's our job to give that to them and show them we do have a plan. We know it's going to be hard. We know exactly where it's going to be hard, but we're a team. We're going to get through it together, and we're going to be better on the other side. Again, this builds trust. It all goes back to building trust, because we build trust, we're building a team, and then anything's possible. You don't have to know how, but you know what? Some of your team members are going to have ideas on how to get through this as well. And if they trust you to offer those ideas, I bet you they're going to help, and they're going to make it less challenging. And I was not surprised. I was very happy. We sailed right through that transition period, almost to where it was just a bump in the road from my perspective. And I think others as well. We got through it. It wasn't nearly the mountain that we thought it was. And I believe wholeheartedly it was because we had a plan, we had built trust, we worked through the issues, we acknowledged the challenges, and we got through it together. Transitioning, leading up. Now, there are people out there who might think that leading up and influencing the boss is something nefarious. And I argue that it's not. This is actually tremendous for you and for your leader, because there's a few important things about knowing how to lead up. And I first started leading up when I was in the Pentagon about almost 15 years ago. Time goes by fast. So about 15 years ago, I was a young captain in the Pentagon, and I was not even a fly on the wall. I was nothing. I was just there to take notes and stay out of the way. But I wanted to be influential. I wanted a seat at the table. I wanted people to hear me. I wanted the general officers to listen to me. And I did a whole bunch of research because I'm continually learning. And I found out one of the best things I needed to do first was understand my leader. Because I have priorities, I have ideas, I have things I want to try that are important to me. Well, guess what? So does my boss. My boss has priorities that he's trying to accomplish that maybe he or she hasn't talked to me about or hasn't talked to the team about, but they're still there. And they can be discovered if we look in the right places, if we pay attention. Understanding how your boss likes to communicate. Do they prefer email? Do they prefer in person? Do they prefer, in today's world, text, chat, whatever it might be? That's important. I've had bosses who love to be briefed directly in person so they can ask their questions right there. They're very comfortable with that. I'm very comfortable with that. I've had other bosses who have told me that briefing them directly was fine, but I could see this particular person physically move back in their chair as I was talking to them and didn't quite know what to say. And even though I literally, my desk was 5 steps away, I would start sending emails to this particular boss, and she responded much better. She was obviously more comfortable with that. Understanding the pressures my leader might be under, because guess what? My boss has a boss, and my boss's boss is pressuring them to do things. And we learn about this in the Marine Corps in something called a 5-paragraph order, for those of you who might know what that is, or have heard of that. And that's just knowing about your superior's superior and what's going on, the next level up. It's important to understand that, because if you don't understand what's pressing your boss, then you're probably not going to get very far. When you've understood your leader, work on understanding what your vision is. What are you trying to get accomplished? If it's an idea, if it's a perspective, it's something new you're trying to do. Then you build options that incorporate both your leader's priorities and pressures that answer them and support them, and your own, so that you build a win-win situation. You build a win-win series of options. And I've done this very effectively. I did this numerous times in the civilian world. And I did this in the military world as well. In the civilian world, we were looking to hire a new person, and there was some resistance to hiring a new person. A new person is costs, a new person is a certain number of hours, and it wasn't quite sure how this person was going to be used. And that's okay. One of the things to know about leading up with your boss is it's okay if there's resistance. It's presenting the different options, the benefits to hiring a person, what that person would do, what pressure that would relieve off other team members, and how they would better be able to serve clients, the number one thing important to my boss at the time. And the other option of not hiring a person and saying, okay, then we don't have to pay somebody, but then we risk, doing these other things. And it was all about, for me, presenting risk, because risk is what happens if we choose this option and things go wrong. So if we hire a new person and things go wrong, the risk was we had a salary to pay. If we don't hire a person and something goes wrong and we get or catastrophic success, as we also said, we have so many clients that we can't serve them all equally well, and then perhaps we lose people because we're not providing excellent client service. That's the risk of not hiring someone. And then let the boss decide. The boss has the power, give the boss the power. And that's very effective in lowering defenses and getting a decision. And no matter what decision the boss makes, everybody's fully informed, everybody knows the lay of the land, and then worst case scenario, if the bad thing happens, we all knew about it going in. The other key thing to leading up that might be harder for some of us than for others is just do what you're told. Sometimes I really don't agree with my leader. I had a paper to write, a research paper on women in ground combat many years ago for a 1-star general, and I did not want to write it. I thought it was silly. I didn't see any value in it. It was not where we should be focused. It didn't matter. If I pushed back on writing that paper with all the reasons that I thought we shouldn't do it, I would lose the trust and confidence from that leader. And I didn't have much to begin with because he didn't like me. So sometimes you just got to do what you're told. And the paper turned out fine. It actually was really valuable. So I was wrong. And, it got used over and over and over again. And I built trust with my leader. And that gave me more autonomy. Because that's the big thing with leading up. When you build trust, you gain autonomy. When you're leading down and you build trust, your subordinates are gaining autonomy, which they love. When you lead up and you build trust, you're gaining autonomy in your actions. Always be straightforward but respectful and offer options. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about men and women. And this was something that was kind of second nature to me. Most of the things that I've learned over the years, because I grew up in the Marine Corps, right? I joined the Marine Corps when I was 21 years old. At the time I was commissioned, it was 94% male. So there were only 6% females. I was so used to being the only woman in the room. I didn't even notice I wasn't the only woman that I was the only woman in the room until I wasn't. until I saw a woman walk into a meeting while I was at the Pentagon. And my first thought was, what's she doing here? And I didn't realize that I should have asked, what am I doing here? So I'm used to working with men and very, very strong male personalities. So I'll say, these are simply observations. They're not good or bad. One of the analogies that I heard as I was doing research, because about 5 years ago, I had realized I didn't know everything there was to know about working with men, and I actually needed to do some research. And one of the things I read was, you might not agree with everything in the culture that you're entering, but just like if you were going to Japan or Singapore or to a foreign country and doing business with them, you would try to learn a little bit about their culture and work within it. You wouldn't just resist it. So I ask all of the women here to listen and to be open-minded, just to understand what might be going on with men. But I'll also say that it's my intent as I offer these examples to talk about the flip side. To talk about, okay, so here's what's going on in this situation, but let's flip it and talk about, okay, what if it was the woman doing this or the man doing this, or how can you do this differently? So I've really tried, as I've thought through the examples that I'm going to discuss, try to give a balanced perspective. The first thing I want to talk about is the accusation I think women get a lot about taking things personally. And to a certain extent, that can be true. We do have a way of taking things personally. And I assure you, it is really not about you. And this took me a bunch of years to learn. This took me a good 10, 12, 13 years to really understand that it is not about you. It is about your job. And the way I learned this was a former superior of mine used to talk about this one officer and say, I love him like a brother. But we both knew he was really not good at his job. He was not living up to the standards of what we would expect from this office or this person of this rank and this background. But I love him like a brother. And I just couldn't understand that. I'm like, how can you like a person that isn't good at their job? How can you do that? And I watched, and men seem to generally, not all men, and it's not true of all women that we all take things personally, but men seem to be able to separate out the social likability with a perspective on how one is doing their job. He really did. He really liked this guy, but he did not appreciate how he was as a professional. So I would offer that to women, that if a man is giving you feedback that seems critical, don't take it personally. Really, it's not about you. I know that might blow your mind, but it really isn't about you. Respect and trust do not necessarily equal social likability, because the flip side is true also. Someone can respect and trust you, but not like you at all. And that's all about social cohesion. But respect and trust in the workplace, as we all know, is much more important. This took me years. It took me years, and it's worth it. If you can open your mind to the idea that if a man is criticizing something about your work, it's actually not about you, and just take that, your life will change for the better. I promise. Another thought on that. Sometimes men do take things personally. So now I'm going to ask the men to be open-minded. Sometimes it is hard to communicate with men, because the way we communicate as women doesn't make us offended, but it might offend men. And one of the examples I have is from a time I was talking to a male captain who was a very good friend of mine, who I respected and trusted to the utmost. And I would ask him a question like, well, why did you do that? And I could see him physically back up in his chair, and his eyes got wide, and he's like, why is she asking me this question? Like it was an accusation, where it really wasn't. And I told him, I could see he had gotten defensive without saying anything. And I said, no, seriously, I'm genuinely curious. why did you do that? What was your rationale? What was your thinking? And I could see the mental defenses lower, as if to say, okay, I know she's still a friend. She still respects me and trusts me. She's genuinely curious. But a simple question that women would ask each other, well, why did you do that? Which to us is curiosity, is not always perceived that way for men. Sometimes it is perceived as an accusation. And so to ask, I'm genuinely curious, I'd really like to know, why did you do that? Softens it, I think, and makes it a little bit more acceptable. Another example is, do you know how to do something? Well, of course they know how to do it, but adding context, maybe saying, I know you know how to do this. Can you show me? Or something like that. Some of this it's really just about context and nuance. And it's about how we communicate with each other, our understandings that we're not even aware of. I didn't know as a woman that we ask each other all the time, why did you do that? And it was a curiosity question, whereas a lot of times it's perceived differently than men. I was not aware I was taking things personally as a Marine until I dissected I love him like a brother, but I don't respect him as a professional dynamic that was going on with my male boss. Some of the other things that have come up in the Marine Corps, something we like to say, suck it up or embrace the suck. And what that really means, as we all know, is just get the job done no matter what. Don't complain. Don't tell me about your day. Don't tell me you didn't sleep last night. Don't tell me all this other stuff. Just get the job done. And, that's the don't bring the personal life to the office. Women do this. This is how we talk to each other and how we relate to each other. I love that. We are agreeing fiercely. But that's not appropriate from a male perspective. Again, generally speaking, not every man, but generally speaking, that's not appropriate for a business environment, for a work environment. And this translates military business, it's all the same. It really is, to a lot of extent. You get the job done no matter what. I remember one night I was at the Pentagon late, and my boss had given me something to do that he really wanted done that night. And I stayed there for hours. I stayed there until 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night. And I wasn't getting anywhere. I finally had to ask him if I could come back early the next morning and get it done by X number of time, because I just wasn't getting anywhere. And it took me such a long time to build up the courage to ask if I could do that, because it's simply not acceptable not to get the job done unless the building's on fire or someone's shooting at you. It's just not acceptable. And it's never said, but it's absolutely there. So, men may have all these things going on inside their lives, but they're going to get the job done. They're not going to say anything about it. So the flip side for the ladies, if you're leading men, we expect that someone would say something if there's something really, if they've got a sick kid at home, or if they've got something they need to take care of, or something else is going on, or they haven't been to one soccer match all season and they really want to go to their daughter's soccer match. We would assume that a woman would say things like this to us. So we might assume that a man would say this similar thing. Odds are he won't. So what I would say to the ladies is that if something seems up with the men that you're leading, or your leaders, your male leaders, something probably is, and they're just not talking about it. And you might actually want to ask. So if you see something not getting done or struggling to get done that you would normally assume could get done, I might say, try asking. I know you've got this, and I know you're usually on top of it, but I see something's going on today. Is there something going on? So just ask. For men, I think men can get frustrated with giving feedback to women. I am not keeping up with the questions. So I hope I'm seeing the questions come up. So I'm waiting on them right now.
My suggestion is let's finish the end of the talk, and then I'll ask you to run through the list, and we'll sort of have a conversation based around some of that commentary. So crack on.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
So sometimes men get frustrated giving women feedback, and I can understand why. Again, I grew up in the Marine Corps, so I think I've gotten tough skin. So it's very easy for me to deal sometimes with men's very straightforward feedback. But I'd offer, if you're a man giving feedback to a woman and you're not quite sure how to approach it because the way you give feedback to a man isn't working or hasn't worked in the past, you might put it into a sandwich. And the way I think about that is you say all the good things up front, and then you offer the critique in the middle, and then you end by saying good things again. That might be helpful. Another tactic you could use when giving a woman feedback is to ask what they think is going well. Get her to talk about the things that are going well, and ask her what they think they could do better. Get her to acknowledge where she might be struggling or what she might not, because I bet she knows. And if she talks about it and she owns up to it, that's going to be a lot easier for you and for her than just telling her, I see you're really struggling with this, or maybe you need to improve upon this. I'm going to talk a few quick things, little things that I think bug men. And I didn't realize this was a male thing, again, until I left the Marine Corps. I did not know this was a male specific thing. And maybe it's not. Again, maybe not all men, most men. Get to the point. And one of the phrases that we had was, don't tell me about the pain, just show me the baby. Men generally don't need the big lead up. They don't need the explanation up front. Something we used to put together in the Marine Corps was called the bottom line up front, or the bluff, the so what. So when you're putting together an email or a briefing, just tell me the so what up front. Tell me right away. And then if I want the details, I'll ask for them. And sometimes women who don't know might they want to explain, they want to give the background, they want to give the context, and they get to the so what at the end. And I think that's very frustrating. They just want to know the so what up front. On the flip side of that, women are really good at building relationships. Men are focused on the mission. Women are really good at building relationships. Not good or bad, not even universal, just general, and they work so well together. And one of the things I learned in the Marine Corps was that we have aspects of masculinity and femininity. Men in the Marine Corps are very good at building relationships and building trust, and they're very good at accomplishing the mission. And I think that's not seen so much in the civilian world. But I think a lot of these things can be translated over to the business world very easily without much adaptation. And I think this is something that's not often understood in the business world from civilians who've never been in the military, is, at least for me, there wasn't much of a switch from being a Marine to being a civilian. People told me before I got out, they're like, you can't treat your civilian employees like you treat your Marines. And I'm like, why not? And when I got out and the various jobs I've had, I treated my employees exactly the way I treated my Marines, with respect, with a vision, with communication, straightforward feedback, with caring and integrity. I treated them exactly the way I treated my Marines, to great success. That's how we build trust. That's how we build a team. That's how we build equity in what we're trying to accomplish. So I'll just close here with, I did go a little bit faster, but I think I'm glad because I want time for questions. For the women, be confident and competent. Be competent first and confident in who you are. And for the men, have the confidence to have some more frank conversations with women. Have that courage to talk to them more freely and about what's going on inside your heads. So I hope you've all enjoyed that. I see there's questions. I am so looking forward to taking your questions. If you'd like to know more, or if you're interested in talking more, please take a look at my website, which Hugo, one of your members, so grateful to him, he helped me put it together. Okay. And I'll stop there for questions. Thank you so much.
Actually, there's been more discussion running in the chat channel than we normally have. If you want to look at run from the top, John Topot as a question, which is, what would you define as being the difference between leadership and management? At which point, without can we have the short version of this rather than the argument that happens over several beers in the bar?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
No, I jest, because it's an interesting. It's a topic. It's a really interesting question.
Oh, it's a brilliant question. It's a brilliant question. Management to me is